Under God, William C. Hendricks, 7th edition, updated and revised, Chapter 4. The development of government. Important ideas to look for. Government began with the family. The thread of representative government is woven throughout history. The background of our American government is basically British. Important English documents granted freedoms that were brought to America. Origins of government generally. The earliest form of government is unknown to us, but it's fairly safe to assume that the family formed the starting point in the administration of the affairs of society. When God created Adam and Eve, he started the family through the institution of marriage. The family has always been the strongest building block in the structure of any society. Even today, the strength of a society or nation depends largely on the families within it. If the homes are orderly with harmony and love, the nation will be strong. If the rate of divorce and broken homes increase, the society will become weak and unstable. You will remember that after the confusion of tongues at the Tower of Babel, people moved into new areas. Hardships and dangers likely forced families with similar problems to join together, thus forming a larger group. This larger community gave obedience to recognized leaders or chiefs, who was generally chosen for some outstanding personal quality such as physical strength, good judgment, or the ability to lead in time of war or natural disaster. Through this leader, the group acted together in matters that applied to more than one individual or family. The way of life of the Old Testament patriarchal Jews is an example of an early type of family government. The family, really a combination of families in the modern sense, worshiped together, organized its own defense against enemies, arranged for hunting grounds and pasture lands, and looked after needed shelters and supplies. We can learn something about these early forms of government from history. People used different systems of controlling their community life. In New Guinea, tribes were loosely organized. A council with one member selected as spokesman generally served as the governing authority. In Australia, a group of tribal elders served as judges as well as lawmakers. In many parts of Africa, a chief ruled with the advice and agreement of the wise men. Although there were many different forms of government organizations in the early days of history, there does not seem to have been too much of what we would call absolute dictatorship. The chief apparently had to rule according to the unwritten law and custom of the tribe. When a serious decision had to be made, the chief called his council of wise men, or consulate, the tribal elders, for their opinions. This strong tone of representative government found among early tribes and among uneducated people of today has caused many history scholars to claim that governmental tyranny runs against a deep-seated human instinct. We recognize this desire and need for freedom to be a reflection of the image of God in humanity. People were created to rule the earth and given the ability to choose right from wrong. Although God's image bearers have fallen into sin, they still reflect traces of God's image, and this gives people the desire to be free. Many of these ancient tribal governments, however, became absolute monarchies. The kings had full power over the people, and they inherited their right to rule from their ancestors. Such absolute monarchies exercised the power of life and death over their subjects. Their word was law. The people had no voice in the government. In some early kingdoms, nobles and other groups wrestled power away from the king and formed an oligarchy. In Greece and Rome, more representative forms of government appeared. In the city-state of Athens, a form of democracy existed before the birth of Christ. In Rome, a republican form of government developed at about the same time or soon afterward. The period of history that followed the breakup of the Roman Empire has often been referred to as the Dark Ages. During this time, the disunited parts of the empire were faced with the problems of governing themselves. In some areas, this was done with little change, as leaders continued in power much the same as before. In others, anarchy and chaos existed. In still other districts, church authorities began to take over many of the responsibilities of civil government. The church officials regulated some of the civil affairs of the people living in the region of their church, and gradually, however, a new social order known as feudalism came to be. Here and there throughout Europe, a man arose and gathered around him a group of men to protect his land. Other weaker landowners of the vicinity came to him and asked for protection. These lesser nobles were required to transfer the ownership of their land to the feudal lord. These lesser nobles, or vassals, then received their land back as fiefs. The land now belonged to the feudal lord, but could be ruled and cultivated by the vassal. The vassal and his helpers or serfs could now perform their farming tasks in reasonable safety. The agreements or contracts between the feudal lord and the vassal were generally based upon personal relationships and tradition rather than on written law and legal procedure. Although there were constant petty wars for the possessions of land, and feudal lord and his vassals stood together for the common defense, civil affairs within some manors or estates were conducted with order and fairness for the standards of that day. In others, justice was unheard of, and affairs were conducted according to the pleasure of those who ruled. From these feudal kingdoms grew the modern nation of Europe. This process involved much war and bloodshed, as well as a variety of alliances and even marriages of family members in adjoining kingdoms. Again, absolute monarchies and oligarchies developed in the various countries. As time went on, new forms of government arose. In England, the idea of a limited monarchy grew. That is, a king under law. In other countries, a more democratic type in the form of a republic began. Dictatorships, which often held a totalitarian or complete control idea of government, also appeared. All these types of government are listed in the chart on page 16. Origins of American government. We have seen that there are many types of government in the past. There are many varieties of these types in the world today. Each type has been and still is under God. To meet the needs of his people throughout all ages, the government of a country and the everyday events within that country will be used by God to fulfill his purposes until that day when Christ will return and the pages of history will be closed. Out of the broad background of government in the past, we find that ideas of American government today have grown. The story of democracy did not begin in our United States of America. It began with the basic God-given desire to be free. The Egyptian slaves who rebelled against their cruel taskmasters were a part of that story. The Greeks and Romans who started plans for self-government were another part. But the people who really surveyed and cleared the pathway for American freedom were the people of England. British background of American government. The background of the American government is basically British. England is our mother country, even though we revolted against its rule. Our government is patterned after England's government. Our customs follow after its customs, and our ideas of freedom are built upon the English struggle for self-rule. Though it is true that we have changed, developed, and added to the ideas and customs that came to us from England, there is much in the American system of government that bears the trademark of Great Britain. Does this seem strange when we think of the United States as a country made up of immigrants from many lands? Perhaps, but we must remember that the 13 English colonies were under royal rule from 1607 to 1775, a span of 168 years, almost as long as the United States has been a nation. In fact, most of the important principles of government that are in use in the United States today were in existence long before the colonies declared their independence from England. The Magna Carta, or Great Charter. Over 700 years ago, King Henry II began to strengthen the monarchy in England. Although he was forced to destroy some of the personal power of the leading nobles, he introduced many judicial reforms and strengthened royal law, thereby ensuring fairer treatment to all English subjects. He was succeeded by his crafty son, King John, who proved to be selfish and cruel. King John did not care for the welfare of the people, nor for the laws made by his father. He increased taxes and ignored the right of trial by jury. Often the rich who committed crimes were allowed to go free, if they paid money to the king. Because King John had trouble with the Pope, there could be no church services. Life was fast becoming unbearable under King John's rule. In 1213, a group of important bishops and barons met to discuss what could be done to re-establish the rights they had previously held. At this meeting, Stephen Langton, Archbishop of Canterbury, made a list of the rights and liberties given to the church leaders and nobles by Henry II and other kings. The group then asked King John to observe them also, but King John paid no attention to their request. The barons and bishops, however, were determined not to be refused. They gathered a great army in 1215 and marched against King John near London. Although the king was furious, he was forced to sign his name to the list and attach the Great Seal of England. Thus the first written Bill of Rights in English history came into being. It was one of the first steps made by Englishmen to change absolute monarchy into limited monarchy. John Richard Green, in the History of the English People, stated that the Great Charter marks the transition from the age of traditional rights, preserved in the nation's memory, to the age of written legislation. Among the important provisions of the Magna Carta were the following. Clause 12. No scutage, tax for military purposes, nor aid, tax, or payment paid by a vassal to a feudal lord shall be imposed in our kingdom unless by the common council of our kingdom. New tax laws therefore needed to be approved by the king's great council before they could be put into effect. At that time, this clause had meaning only for the barons or feudal lords. However, it deals with the basic rights of an individual to own property. This right later became an issue in the American Revolution when the colonies protested taxation without representation. In the January 9, 1769 copy of the Boston Gazette, Samuel Adams wrote, "No man can take another's property from him without his consent." Clause 39. No free man shall be seized, imprisoned, dispossessed, deprived of his land, outlawed or exiled, or in any way destroyed, nor will we proceed against or prosecute him except by the lawful judgment of his peers, equals, or by the law of the land. Although this clause protested against the type of jury trials held under the rule of King John and against the royal court's use of royal law, the later misinterpretation of these words is very important. Centuries afterward, it was assumed to be an early expression of our present-day right of trial by jury. Clause 90. To none will we sell, to none will we deny, to none will we delay right or justice. In 1215, the rights provided by the Magna Carta applied only to the powerful freemen of that day, that is, the clergy and the barons. Very little or nothing was said about the rights of the other 5/6 of the population, who were serfs on the lands of the barons. History seems to indicate that the Magna Carta was largely ignored and nearly forgotten in the years that followed. But when the system of feudalism finally disappeared and serfs became freemen, many of the rights of the Magna Carta became the rights of all Englishmen. Other rights gained by Englishmen. About 400 years after the Magna Carta was signed, Charles I became King of England. Parliament at that time was eager to extend its rights so refused to Charles I the privileges and powers that earlier kings had enjoyed. The king then dissolved the Parliament and ordered people to lend him money. Some rich people who refused to pay were thrown into prison, while people of lower rank who opposed the king were forced into the army. During the winter of 1627 through 1628, thousands of families were ordered to feed and lodge the king's soldiers in their homes without pay. Many of these soldiers were rough and disorderly. They did not respect the rights of the people with whom they lived. The people of England were angry with King Charles, and when Parliament next met, it forced the king to sign a petition of right. The petition said, number 1, the king could not force anyone to lend him money. All gifts, loans, and taxes required by the government of the people must be approved by the Parliament. Number 2, the king could not put any citizen into prison without just cause. And number 3, No soldier could be housed in a private home without the consent of the owner. This right became very important many years later when American colonists protested against the Billeting Act, which forced the colonists to keep British soldiers in their homes. And number 4. During the time of peace, the laws of the army could not be forced upon the general population. This petition of right added to the freedoms already gained under the Magna Carta. In 1679, milestone was reached along the road to freedom when the Habeas Corpus Act was passed. This act said that a person could not be put into prison and kept there without a charge being made against him, or without a trial. He had to be brought before a judge with a certain length of time. The judge would then decide whether the prisoner should be held for a trial or set free. The Bill of Rights passed in 1689 gave freedom of speech to the members of Parliament during its sessions. The Bill of Rights kept the judges from levying fines that were too heavy and prevented cruel and unusual punishments. The people were given the right to petition the king freely if they felt they were being unjustly treated. The Bill of Rights also made it illegal to keep a standing army in time of peace without the consent of Parliament. These 4, the Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, the Habeas Corpus Act, and the Bill of Rights, are the most important documents of the English Constitution. They are the result of violence and revolution. The freedoms they include were forcefully extracted from unwilling kings by those who often sought their own interests. How much sin is evident in the lives of those who ruled and those who rebelled against that rule. Yet we may be thankful that the freedoms of the people of England were carried, under God's providential care, by the colonists to the New World as they sought new homes and greater opportunities. Here they found the greatest freedom of all, freedom to worship God as they pleased. Do you remember what you've read? Number 1. Define the following terms: feudalism, patriarch, vassal, ancestor, fief, manor, tyranny, vicinity. Number 2. What's the first form of government? 3. Give an example of patriarchal government. Number 4. Why were the Dark Ages called by that name? 5. How did the feudal lord increase the size of his land holdings? 6. What group of people led the rebellion against King John? 7. How did the Magna Carta help to change the absolute monarchy of England to a more limited one? 8. List 2 rights granted in the Magna Carta that we still enjoy. 9. Why did Parliament pass the Petition of Right? 10. What practice did the Habeas Corpus Act stop? For further thought, although the Magna Carta benefited only 1/6 of the English people, why is it signing such an important monument or moment in history? Number 2. The freedoms of the Magna Carta did not apply to all the people of the 13th century England. Do you think that the freedoms of our Constitution apply to all people of the 21st century America? Why or why not? Number 3. When do you think people generally appreciate things more? When they are given to them, or when they have to work and sacrifice to get them? Number 4. How can we learn to appreciate more of the blessings we have today because of the efforts of our ancestors? 5. Our country is well into the 3rd century of its existence. What challenges and problems face us today that were unknown to the people living at the time of the Magna Carta was signed? Can we solve our problems in the same way they did? Why or why not? Number 6. Do Christians and non-Christians view history in the same way? If not, what differences would you expect to find in the way they study a historical event or in the conclusion they reach? Words to study: banish, Magna Carta, Bill of Rights, noble, custom, parliament, document, pure, habeas corpus, petition, levy, serf, and lord.